All right. Well, I'm glad you guys can all make it. This will be a lot of fun. I'm excited for this. This is session number 4 in Creation Science 101. The rest of them are on our YouTube channel, so go into Solidify Your Faith and you'll be able to see them. Let's dive right in. Welcome to Creation Science 104, where we're going to falsify evolution twice. And we're going to show several frauds that have been used in the past to prop up this theory of evolution. And let's start with the ringleader himself, Ernst Haeckel. He's the most famous German zoologist, and he's probably the most read scientist in the world. And he had a book out there called The Riddle of the Universe, and it was translated into every major language, and if you wanted an education at that time, you probably had to read that book. So what did he believe?
How many years ago was this?
This was about the 1880s or so. 1870s, 1880s, right in there. And then after Darwin died, he became more popular. So around the 1880s to 1900s, somewhere in there. And so what did he believe? He believed that the so-called lower races of mankind, like the Native Americans, Australian Aborigines, and Chinese people, were much closer to the animals than they were to the cultivated European world. That's what and he's an expert. We should trust the experts, right? He also believed that blacks were more ape-like. And these are the experts. And he loved that Darwinian theory, just loved it. And he thought, if only there was some evidence for this theory. And the years go by and there's no evidence, so he thought, well, I guess I'll make my own evidence. And he made these drawings, known as Haeckel's drawings. And basically he says, we all look the same when we're first developing as an embryo. Doesn't matter if you're a fish, a salamander, turtle, chicken, rabbit, human, we all look the same. Because we're going through our evolutionary development. Just remember farm, fish, we got here by fish, animal, reptile, and mammal. That's the stages of evolution on how we got here. And they're all right in the fish stage right there. And nobody had a microscope to check his work. They were all frauds. He made it up to tell a story. And if you look at those, they're not like each other, not at all. And it's not even the first stage of the development. And so listen to Dr. Wells.
If you go back earlier in development, the different classes of vertebrates look even more different.
According to Wells, Haeckel, and many modern textbooks, mislead students not just because of faked drawings, but because they leave out the earliest stages of embryonic development. What students are shown as the first stage of embryonic development is actually the mid-stage.
And very few textbooks show those earliest stages, and yet that's the whole point. It's the earliest stages that are supposed to be the most similar, and they're not. Some textbooks actually use photographs of embryos, but they pick only that stage and those classes that happen to look most similar. And they omit the earlier stages, and they omit those classes that don't look similar. So that, to me, is picking the evidence very carefully to support the theory, and that's not good science.
Okay, and it's not just the creationists that are blowing the whistle. This is the New Scientist, and this is from 2015. It says, how fudged embryo illustrations led to drawn-out lies. And they're talking about those same drawings over 100 years later. And it says, it's embarrassing but true, some of the most influential drawings in the history of biology are wrong, exaggerated to fit a thesis. And yeah, they are influential, because that's what was argued in front of the Supreme Court in 1973. And they said that baby is just in the fish stage, so it's okay to kill it. And that opened the door to evolution. And in 1997, remember this is the 1890s when they're talking about this stuff. 100 years later, the New Scientist says that they still appear in reference books such as Gray's Anatomy, what the doctors are looking at. 100 years later, these frauds are still being portrayed. Haeckel confessed, and he was convicted of fraud at the University of Jena. The drawings persist. That's the real mystery. Why are these drawings still in the textbooks to prop up this theory? And again, a theory that's true doesn't need to have frauds propped up for 100 years. And this is a book, this was hard to find on the internet. This is called Haeckel's Frauds and Forgeries. You can download the whole book at creationism.org. And this was the preface to the book. It says exactly 100 years ago, in 1915, scientists thought they had finally put to rest the fraudulent embryo drawings. And a half a century of exposed fraud. But it goes on to say that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, farm. That's our evolutionary pattern. and the pseudoscience and the wholly contrived biogenetic law both remain in many biology textbooks even today. And that was in 2015. Now think about this. Now you're going into the book by 1874. Now think about that. That's 9 years after the Civil War. I think it's before the light bulbs even invented. In 1874, way back then, Haeckel's own scientific peers began to reprimand his false data. In fact, his own university in Germany censored him for his continued academic dishonesty. But the popular media of the day, in Germany, England, and other countries, generally sided with Haeckel, since it told them what they wanted to hear. No more answering to the God of the Bible. So I guess some things never change. Even way back then, the media was anti-God. And so that was 1874. Well, the Holy Spirit or whatever, his conscience finally got to bother him in 1908, 34 years later, and he confessed. And there is people out there saying he never did anything fraud. And it's like, well, if he didn't, why did he confess? And he confessed in December 29th in 1908 in the Berliner Volkszeitung newspaper. And this is what he wrote. I begin at once with the contrite confession that a small fraction of my numerous drawings of embryos, perhaps 6 or 8%, are falsified. They're fakes. But then he goes on to say, after this compromising confession of forgery, I should be obligated to consider myself condemned and annihilated if I had not the consolation of seeing side by side with me in the prisoner's dock hundreds of fellow culprits, among them many of the most trusted observers and most esteemed biologists. So basically he's saying, yeah, I did it, but so what? Everybody does it. The book goes on and says, he declares that he has, after all, only done what all the other embryologists and biologists have done. Such sort of excuse only makes matters worse. If true, we have here the greatest blow ever struck against the reliability of scientific men and against the current method of pushing the evolution theory. So if true, yeah, it's true that he said it, but is what he said true? Is everybody doing that? Or is he just saying, yeah, he's just making something up? Well, how would we know if it's true? We'd have to go around and check out the fossils and the information and make sure, see if it's accurate in the science journals and the museums. So what we're doing is we're looking for a volunteer who would like to go to 15 countries, 5 continents, travel about 300,000 miles and take almost 250,000 photographs, and we'll give you 27 years to do it. Does anybody want to do that? Okay, well here's the catch. You got to fund it yourself. 40 grand a year you're going to invest for 30 years. And I called a financial planner and asked him, how much would that be? And he said, that'd be $2 million. But it was $14 million overall cost. Lost wages and lost cash investments. And how do I know that? Because that's what the Werners did. Debbie and Carl Werner, they went all over the world to interview these scientists and take photographs of the fossils and compare them with what's being taught. And just incredible, incredible work. And these are the 5 volumes of books they got. They've got The Grand Experiment. And it's taken them 27 years to do it. And these last 3 volumes just came off the press last month. So this is cutting edge information. And you're going to be able to listen to him being interviewed. If you go into my Facebook page called Solidify Your Faith, these are posted right at the top. You'll be able to hear him being interviewed on Real Science Radio, rsr.org. He does 2 interviews with them. And that's what I was doing yesterday at St. Cloud State with my Bluetooth speaker. I was listening to them, blaring it on this as the students went by. And typically that's what I'll do. I'll just go there and say, hey, there's another way of looking at things. And he was also interviewed on Creation Today. And so it's good to get this information out there. It's good for you to listen to it. It's good for you to share it, because this is bombshell information that destroys evolution if people know about it. So he did the work. Now it's our work to share it and make sure they can't sweep it under the rug again like they did with the dinosaur blood cells. Okay, so who's this Carl Werner guy? Well, he was accepted into med school when he was 17. There was a program back then you could get accepted. And so he graduated from med school when he was 23. And by the way, and he was in the upper 1 percentile. He was in the 99th percentile of his medical exams. He was in the top 1%. Oh, and do you know what you call somebody who graduates at the bottom of his med school class? He's the absolute worst student in the class. You know what you call him? Doctor. That's what you call him. He graduated. So anyhow, How did, what happened to him? You know, when he was 19, he was an evolutionist. He had walked away from God for the most part and his family, just doing what the world wants. And he went out to pizza with a friend. And that friend asked him 4 questions that changed his life. And questions are very powerful. Spike Pizarro's, his question that changed his life was, how do you believe in the Big Bang and the laws of physics at the same time? Because the Big Bang violates the first law. You can't get matter from nothing, and yet that's what the Big Bang says. You get matter from nothing. And so that changed his life. And the 4 questions for Carl Werner was, hey, do you believe in the evolution? And he said, yeah. And he said, well, what about the problems with the fossil record? We should have found all these transitional fossils, and we haven't found them. And he said, oh, I didn't realize there was a problem. And he said, what do you think about the problems with the Big Bang and the laws of physics? And he goes, oh, I didn't realize there was a problem. And then he said, well, how do you, and this one struck him right between the eyes, how did life begin if proteins don't form naturally? Because Mr. 99 percentile, he understands chemistry really well, and he understands biology really well. And he knows that proteins don't form naturally under any situation. And so how could life begin? How could evolution be true if that stuff can't happen? And the guy, Carl, still believed in evolution, so the guy says, hey, Carl, I challenge you to prove evolution. He thought, that's crazy, it's been proven. It's in the museums, the textbooks, the science journals, it's on the TV, it's everywhere, it's got to be proven. And yet he couldn't answer those fundamental questions. And he's there on a full-ride science scholarship, and he can't answer how did life begin and where did matter come from? So those questions went around in his head, and finally, he decided he would review the evidence for the theory of evolution from top to bottom and then devise ways to test it. So that first part right there took 18 years. He studied evolution for 18 years. He knows it inside out, and that's what Volume 1 is all about, how evolution doesn't work. And then he had to figure out some experiments. How can we prove this? The scientific method, a scientist will start with an idea and then test the validity of his idea by vigorously trying to disprove it. And if he can't falsify it, then the original theory remains tentatively true. He's trying to falsify evolution. So, okay, now if evolution is false, he thought, okay, if evolution is false, we should find a whole bunch of modern animals with the dinosaurs. Because dinosaurs were millions of years before the modern animals, according to the evolution theory. And he said we should find them, if evolution's false, we should find modern animals with the dinosaurs. And you know what he found? He found all 3 groups of fish living today, both major amphibian groups living today, all 4 reptile groups, orders living today, most are all bird orders living today, and all 3 types of mammals living today in the dinosaur layers of rock. He found it all. And I was at St. Cloud State prepping my very first talk when an atheist club was hanging around at our table, and a guy named Yank, or he liked to be called Yank, his name was Micah. I asked him, you know, what evidence would you need to see to stop believing in evolution? He said, if you found a mammal with the dinosaurs. And so I showed him the book. There's been 432 species of mammals found with the dinosaurs. He goes, let me see that. Who wrote that? What are his qualifications? You know, and he's just trying everything he could do to disprove it. And yet that's what Carl and Debbie did. They went to the field and they asked the people digging up the stuff, you find anything that looks modern? And that's what they told them. But then they went to 60 museums and they didn't see it displayed that way. You got the dinosaurs here, the modern animals there, so you think there's millions of years. So that's not an accurate representation of what they find in the field. So just think of museums as churches for the atheist. That's where they go to get their unbelief in God solidified. It's not an accurate representation of what they find in the ground. And then I asked Yank, I said, you know, what's your best evidence for evolution? And he said the human fossils, the ape-man fossils, and we're going to destroy that in a few minutes. And then he also said whale evolution. Yeah, because that's all they got for transitional fossils. You got the whale and you got the humans. That's pretty much all they got. They tried to squeeze Archaeopteryx in there, but that's a fraud. And so I got to look. I've looked at as much curriculum as I can in the area. And this is Coal Springs curriculum, and they've got that Rhodocetus. That's the transition from a land animal to a whale. Okay, so evolution says life began in the water, came up on the land, and then became a whale. Okay, that's Rhodocetus right there, and that's contrary to the Bible. Because the Bible says that the whales are made on day 5 and the marine animals, and then the land animals on day 6. So they're contradictory. You can't believe both. You can't believe in both of them. If you're a theistic evolutionist, you're logically inconsistent. You can't believe they came before animals and after land animals at the same time. So there's Rhodocetus, and this is the Sauk Rapids textbook. There's Rhodocetus again. And so Dr. Werner, he went to the guy who found Rhodocetus. I think it was Gingrich. And this is the interview that he has with Gingrich.
When this video series was being filmed on location at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, the executive producer noticed a discrepancy between museum drawings of Rhodocetus and the fossils. The reconstruction of Rhodocetus had a whale fluke, but there were no fossils of the tail to confirm this. Dr. Phil Gingrich, the scientist responsible for the discovery and reconstruction of Rhodocetus, was questioned how he knew there was a whale fluke on Rhodocetus, since that part of the fossil was missing.
What was the reasoning that the scientists think there was a fluke on Rhodocetus based on the other pieces of anatomy?
Well, I told you we don't have the tail in Rhodocetus, so we don't know for sure whether it had a ball vertebra indicating a fluke or not. So I speculated it might have had a fluke.
Scientist Gingrich also acknowledged that the flippers were drawn on the diagram without these fossils. Now, he does not believe this animal had flippers. Again, his answer was surprising, since the museum diagrams had flippers on Rhodocetus.
Yeah, very surprising. Is Haeckel right? Is everybody doing it? Well, Gingrich seems to prove that point. And it's his own museum, and he doesn't think that it's accurate, but he doesn't change the false drawing. It's really suspicious, I would say. And so then Dr. Werner, so we falsified it once. We falsified evolution once because we found modern animals with the dinosaur layer. And then he did another experiment. He said, hey, if evolution's true, if evolution's false, the modern animals should look just like their fossil ancestors. That's what it should be, because there wasn't any evolution. You know, nothing changed over millions of years. So if the modern animals look identical to their fossil ancestors, evolution's false. And this is what they see, a sign in a museum in Albuquerque. This is, GARs haven't changed much during the last 100 million years. As a matter of fact, it's difficult to distinguish them from the ones living today. And then he went to a museum and he saw a shrimp. He saw a fossil shrimp and he goes, man, that looks just like the stuff from Louisiana. And he did some more searching, he did some more studying, and to his credit, he compared the two scientific terms for them. See, every animal is identified by two Latin words, one for genus, one for species. And yet the scientists don't believe they're the same. Different genus, different species. And this is how they do it, you know, the two Latin words. And he thought, well, basically, maybe this scientist just had a bad day. You know, maybe this is the exception, not the rule. Let's look at these two skulls. Do those look like the same species? The same animal? The same kind of animal? No. But they are. They're both Canis familiaris. Anybody know what that is?
Dogs.
Dogs, yeah. They're both dogs. You can have a long stretched out nose like an Irish wolfhound, or you can have a pushed up nose like a bulldog. And you can have that much variety within a species, and yet when something looks identical, one's fossil and one's modern, they say, no, they're not the same species. So just compare those two words. I can't pronounce them, but just notice that they're different. Again, they look the same. The horseshoe crab looks the same. Different genus, different species. Different genus, different species. They look identical. Why aren't they called the same thing? And he'd point it out to them and say, these are the same. They say, no, there's big differences. Well, I certainly can't find them. They look identical, so they must have their evolutionary perspective blinding them. And that's what volume 2 is all about. Now he goes through and it's just page after page after page of stuff that looks identical, and yet the scientists think they are not the same animal. And that's his first 2 volumes. Now let's move on to the human evolution. This is volume 3, Untold Stories of Human Evolution, and this is where it gets fun. And here's a spoiler alert. There was 5 ape men that they made out of ordinary animal bones. 40 professional scientists promoted these ape men, and they were made out of animal bones, made out of bones of dolphin, cat, dog, hippo, pig, horse, donkey, raccoon, and bovid family bones. And these scientists had 43 university professorships. So these are the experts. And they're putting all these animal bones together and saying they're ape men. They had 4,500 science journal articles published and 128 books on the topic of evolution. So these are the experts. Should we trust the experts? And they also misinterpreted 16,000 ordinary rocks as ape-man stone tools. So this is what we're getting into. And now the plot thickens. Back in 1925, William Jennings Bryan, now he was very, very popular. Everybody knew who he was because he ran for president. He won the nomination for president 3 times. So everybody knows who he is. He never won, but everybody knows him. He was the senator from Nebraska 2 terms. He was also a Secretary of State under Wilson. So everybody knows him. And he's very articulate. He draws really big crowds. And he wrote this article for the New York Times. I think it was front page, Sunday edition. It said, God and Evolution. And he charged that American teachers of Darwinism make the Bible a scrap of paper. And so and then at the very end of it, he called out the president of the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And he said, would you like to respond? He invited him to respond. So now we got a public debate between creation and evolution in the New York Times. And it's kind of like there's going to be a debate between Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro coming up. Oh, I can't wait for that. The sparks are going to fly there. But again, everybody's going to tune in and see what it's like, and that's what's happening. And so now it comes to our second character as the plot thickens. This is the president of the museum, Dr. Henry Osborne, and he spent the majority of his career at the prestigious American Museum of Natural History in New York City. The prestigious, this is highly respected. What they say goes, and he's running it. And so he's got to respond publicly to the charges of evolution, to that evolution critique. And what does he believe? Well, he believed that the standard intelligence of the average adult Negro is similar to that of an 11-year-old youth of the species Homo sapien. So he doesn't believe black people are humans. And so he's an expert, and he said from this prestigious museum, we should trust the experts, right? Well, he responded, kind of a milquetoast thing that says evolution is true, but now there's a everybody's watching this big debate, and I suppose people in America are picking sides, and then he gets sent a letter saying, hey, we found this ape-man tooth in Nebraska, and he sends it to him, and this is just a month later. What a coincidence. And so then Dr. Osborne, think if he's got a conflict of interest here. If Dr. Osborne was correct in interpreting Cook's fossil tooth as being from a human-like ape, the importance of the discovery for evolution and the positive publicity generated for the American Museum would be enormous. But if he was wrong, and it's not an ape-man tooth, negative fallout for the museum and the public's acceptance of evolution would be crippling, since Osborne was now debating with the well-known Bryan in the New York Times. So does he have some incentive for that to be an ape-man? He's got a whole bunch of incentive to be an ape-man. And so he puts together his dream team. Anybody who knew more about fossils, about teeth, than he did, he got on his team. So nobody can contradict him, is what I think happened. So Drs. Osborne, Matthew, and Gregory were considered the world's best of the best and had unrivaled experience of the scientific study of mammalian fossilized teeth. So these are the experts. Nobody can question them. They know more than everybody. But so they got published in these peer-reviewed journals, and some scientists from London complained. They said, you just gave us drawings. How is that proof? He sent out x-rays of the tooth, that's right, just one tooth, and then he reminded his colleagues of the heated battle raging in the United States over the controversial topic of evolution. Any unfavorable comments from the London scientists regarding this fossil would undermine the theory of evolution and jeopardize his hard-fought public relations battle with William J. Bryan. Yeah, so he basically said, you guys be quiet over there. You're going to shoot yourself in the foot if we want people to believe evolution. So this has nothing to do with science anymore. It's peer review. They critiqued him, and he's saying, keep your mouth shut. We want the people to believe in evolution. And so from that single tooth, that's the picture that they drew for the Illustrated London News. Yeah, from one tooth. You got to be pretty good to know what the ape man looked like from one tooth, and also what tools he was using and what his family looked like. That's all from one tooth. And these books are so beautiful. That's where I got these pictures from. A lot of these are just PDFs. Just phenomenal books. I was at the college yesterday, here with a kiosk, and I had a thing, have you been lied to, or were you taught lies? And had people put yes or no. And somebody was coming, she's looking at the book, and she's in design, and she's going, man, this is a beautiful book. And Bob Enyart said, when he goes through a book, it looks like it's gone through a war, because he's writing here, dog-earing there. And he says, I just couldn't bring myself to write in these books. They're just beautiful. And so I encourage everybody to get one of these for their library. And so
what years is this?
that would be 1922. The New York Times piles on September 17th, 1922. Okay, and that's just 3 years before the Scopes Monkey trial in 1925. So now the plot really thickens, because now there's a court case in Dayton, Tennessee, where it's basically, can we teach human evolution in school? If I understand it right, they were teaching evolution, but not human evolution. So that's what it was all about. And so William Jennings Bryan, he was arguing that it shouldn't be taught, and Clarence Darrow, he was arguing that it should be taught. And so now the whole world, and this is on the radio, now it's a new technology. People around the world are listening to this creation versus evolution debate. And it was really kind of sneaky how they did it. Bryan was confronted with a battery of great scientific experts who stunned him with the facts of Nebraska Man. That's what they called the ape man from the tooth, Nebraska Man. The experts scoffed and made a mockery of him. After all, who was he to question the world's greatest scientific authorities? Well, I'm here to say, question the authorities. Question them. And what happened was they put Bryan on the stand and just asked him a bunch of stuff that he couldn't really answer very well. So he made the Christians look not very smart. And then the next day, Darrow was supposed to be on the stand, and then Bryan would make him look like an idiot trying to defend evolution. But after the first day, they said, okay, we plead guilty. So they didn't have to go on the stand. And it was just a real slimy thing they did. But what happened? It was a pig. So in 1922, it's an ape man. In 1927, it's a pig. Okay, now, misinterpreting a tooth is not fraud. I may call it incompetence, but it's not fraud. But what is fraud is when they lied about when they found that tooth. Because they said they found it last year. It says, Dr. Osborne falsely claimed that the Harold Cook found the tooth in 1921. And that was a lie, so that is fraud. Here's the timeline. In 1909, they found a jaw of a pig, and they saw the teeth look real similar to humans. And in 1909, they said, if you find teeth here, be careful, because it's pig teeth. It's not human teeth. That's 1909, so they knew that. And then 1917, they found that tooth of a pig, and they put it on the shelf and didn't really think much about it. And then 1922, William Jennings Bryan starts this public debate, and so somebody takes that tooth of the pig and sends it to Osborne, who says it's an ape man. And that's what they used with the Scopes Monkey trial. And then in 1926, somewhere around there, they figured that it was a pig. And then a year later, around Christmas, they said they admitted it and they published it. Right? When people are busy with Christmas. So what's the repercussions for Osborne? Did he resign in shame? Not only was he wrong, thinking a tooth was from a human when it was from a pig. No, he got promoted. He didn't get fired. He didn't get shamed. He was elected president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the highest honor that U.S. and Canadian scientists can give a colleague, and appeared on the cover of Time magazine. So you can commit fraud and get promoted if you go against God. But if you do real science like Mark Armitage and find bone cells in a triceratops horn, and bone cells can't last millions of years, he got fired. And so this is not science. This is not observable, repeatable, nothing like that. Okay, that's chapter 3. Now let's take a look at Tongchild. This is going to South Africa. Another character. This is Dr. Raymond Dart. And who trained him? His mentor was Dr. Grafton Smith, who was the one who endorsed 3 frauds. Piltdown Man, he said, was an ape man, when in actuality it was the jaw of an ape and the skull of a human. And Smith said, yeah, that's good to go. Another one was the Neanderthal Man, where they promoted him as an ape man and was actually all human. And again, they didn't let people look at these fossils. That's the real problem. They'd hide them. This is what we found, but they won't let you look at them. And then Nebraska man, he approved that one too. So he's real excited about finding all these ape men, even though they're frauds. And he taught Dart, Dr. Dart. So Dart finds this skull that looks exactly like a juvenile chimpanzee skull and says, hey, it's an ape man child. It's the Tong child. And he got reprimanded by his colleagues saying, no, that's a chimp skull, not a human skull. And what happened to him after he was rebuked? He got promoted. He got promoted. They appointed him the dean of the faculty of medicine. So it's just bizarre. I mean, paleontology must be the only place in the world where you can be just fraudsters and get promoted. And so he didn't like getting criticized, so he stepped into the shadows for about 10 years, and then they coaxed him back out. And he made an ape man, not out of a tooth, but of all these different animal bones, from the dog, baboon, monkey, cow, horse, and cat kind. Took all them bones and said, hey, here's an ape man. Dr. Clark says that all of the 14,812 collected stone tools from the cave were just ordinary rocks. Just ordinary rocks. Can you believe that? 14,812. So they got a pretty good number there of collected stones from the cave were just ordinary rocks. I think we got way too much tax money going into this. And then at the end of his life, Dr. Dart told his colleague, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Well, that's kind of validating what Haeckel said. He didn't let the truth get in the way of his drawings. Or Osborne, he didn't let the truth get in the way of his ape man. And then Dart, the same thing. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. In these interviews, you can see on the DVD, he's got eight videos out there. You can get all of them. These are phenomenal. Okay, chapter 5. This is Orsi man. Okay, this is Spain. And the oldest ape man ever to be discovered in Europe and Asia, the small town of Orsi, Spain, and has become the science tourist destination. So Orsi, Spain, so now it's not only political, now it's economic. A lot of money coming into that town, and there's publicity. There's over 300 articles plus radio and TV coverage in the first year alone. Look at this ape man. It was just a piece of a skull. And on the inside there was like cement on it, so you could see the outside. And then a year later, they cleaned off that cement on the inside, and you see these ridges, that crown on the top there. There's a ridge connecting the two sides of the skull, and that's from a horse or a donkey. And so there's a scientist that's saying, hey, you can't have a press conference to say this is a human because it's obviously a donkey. And he didn't want to do it, and there's some reasons why he didn't want to do it. There was 500 guests coming to Orsi to attend the International Science Conference at the end of the month to discuss the fossil ape man skull and its implication for human evolution. So you don't want to call that a donkey. And he's also been promoted because it was an ape man skull. And now that little town, Orsi, Spain, is now the mecca of paleontology. So now everybody's coming to that little town. And now his budget quadrupled. I mean, life is good because it's an ape man skull. And then now everybody's famous. And also he's going to get royalties for writing a book about an ape man. He's not going to get money for writing about a donkey. But so that scientist that was trying to pressure him to do the press to admit it, did it themselves. Since he didn't, that other scientist did. And so now the newspapers had a heyday with this. Now another word for donkey is ass, okay? And so here's the headlines. Ass is taken for a man. Scientists make ass of an old skull. And then that international conference was quickly and quietly canceled. And a press conference to announce the mistake was never held. Okay, so they had all those 300 articles saying, hey, it's an ape man. And then they said, no, we got to cancel it. It's a donkey. But the guy who found it, he didn't give it up. I mean, that's his meal ticket. If he can convince people that that's an ape man. And then with that skull, they found all these rock tools. Those are ape man tools. And they look just like regular rocks. And there's probably, 1,400 of them. And so those got misclassified is what I think Clark says about that. And so how does this happen? There's hominid-colored glasses. Dr. White says the problem with a lot of anthropologists is they want so much to find a hominid, ape man, that any scrap of bone becomes a hominid bone. And so they found a dolphin, rib of a dolphin, and said, hey, here's part of an ape man. And that actually happened. Okay, so how does this happen? Well, you exaggerate the fossil significance to ensure funding. You don't get funding for a donkey skull. You get a whole lot for a human skull. And the guy, again, the guy in charge of it, that's his meal ticket again. He's set for life if he can convince other people that this is an ape-man skull. And so he sought and obtained endorsements of his Orsi ape-man from prominent evolutionist scientists. It's kind of a good old boy club. You know, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. I'll say yours is an ape-man, you say mine is an ape-man. Dr. Koblenz, he was the co-discoverer of Lucy. He started to endorse this one, and also Philip Tobias, and he's coming on later in this talk. Okay, so that was 1984 when they figured out it was a donkey skull, but yet it still shows up. From 1989 to 2016, it shows up as an ape man in National Geographic, in Nature, and it may still be going on today. So this Orsi Museum, the ape man is still in a museum. And they interviewed one of the previous curators of the museum, and he says, most of the people don't believe it's human, especially the paleontologists. And yet it's a boom for the community, so they keep pretending it's an ape man. All right, so now let's go on. That's volume 3. Now let's move on to volume 4, and that brings us to Lucy. And you might have seen this before. This is Cole Spring's textbook, and it says, Lucy's skeleton was remarkably complete. So remarkably complete skeleton. This is a St. Cloud State textbook. It says Lucy had a nearly complete skeleton. So remarkably complete, nearly complete. Those are false statements because that's all they got is 40 bones. That's not nearly complete. That's mostly missing. And yet notice there aren't any hand bones or foot bones, but what do they put on Lucy at the St. Louis Museum? Human hands, human feet, and whites in the eye. They don't have any evidence for any of that, so they're doing whatever they can to make Lucy, an ape, turn into a human ape man. And then they found more of her species, and they found that her feet and her hands were as curved as a chimp's. And Carl Kirby has documents saying that they're more curved than a chimp. So their footprint's going to be a whole lot different than ours. And then Dr. Johansson, he said that Lucy had a human knee. So Dr. Werner went over and talked to the co-discoverer of Lucy, and he asked about the knee, and the guy says it's an ape. And Carl Werner almost fell out of his chair, because everywhere you look, they say it's human. And the co-discoverer says, no, it's ape. So there's a problem with the knee, there's a problem with the hip. If you look at this picture way to the left, that's a chimp hip, and way to the right is a human hip, and the one in the middle is what Lucy's hip used to look like. It used to look like a chimp hip, but then they adjusted it to make it look like a human hip. And you don't have to take my words for it. Look at Nova, In Search of Human History. This is their documentary. I can't believe they put it out, but this is what they did.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Well, I hope so. If you cut it apart and put it back together the way you want it to look, it better look that way. So is that kind of verifying what Haeckel said? Hey, everybody's doing it. They seem to be, I mean, these are the experts. Are they doing stuff that's trustworthy? And I was at a kiosk at St. Cloud State, and the anthropology club was right next to me, and I brought this up. I said, did you know they cut Lucy's hip and twisted it to make it turn it from a chip to a human? She goes, oh, no, they didn't do that. I said, sure they did. Do you want to see it? I had my computer right there. No, I don't want to see it. Yeah, that's the department with a lot of blue hair. Yeah, I don't last long in there. I was in there once trying to get them to take a look at these science journals. That didn't last very long. So now there's these Laetoli footprints. You know, hundreds of miles away from where Lucy was, and I've heard somebody say even 1,000 miles away, they find these human footprints. And this is what the college textbook says. Lucy definitely walked upright, and this is copyright 2012. Okay, most definitely walked upright, and here's pictures of the footprints, and it says it looks like somebody just walked down the beach. Looks like human footprints. And so Johansson's got a problem with the knee. He's got a problem with the hip. So this is his best evidence for Lucy walking upright. And it says the trackway became Dr. Johansson's strongest piece of evidence for Lucy walking upright on 2 feet. Well, let's take a look at Lucy's feet. Remember, she had curved feet like a chimp. On the right, that's a chimp footprint. On the left, that's a human footprint, and that's the Laetoli footprint in the middle. Is that a chimp or a human? I mean, a chimp can't make a footprint like that. Their toes, their big toe goes straight out, and that's not what's at Laetoli. But Johansson wrote, the only hominid present at the Laetoli deposit was the Lucy type, and by inference, the footprints must have been made by members of this species. It's just like, all we find are these Lucy species. And then Dr. Werner, he went to Africa. He went to Laetoli to take photographs of their fossils. And Laetoli fossil 1 is like a jaw or something. He's taking photographs, and then something else, and then it gets out to Laetoli number 18, and it's a human skull. And again, he almost fell off his chair because everybody said there was no human skulls there by those footprints. So that's fraud number 2. And he writes that, so he should have known about that skull. You know, you go through what previous people had found, and Mary Leakey had found that human skull. And Dr. Johansson had the opportunity to correct his misstatements in the 1997 Nova television documentary about Lucy, but he didn't. He also had an opportunity when Dr. Werner was interviewing him, but he didn't. So this is the second example of Dr. Johansson seemingly and knowingly providing false information when communicating with the public. So should we trust the experts? You know, are they trustworthy? What's their track record? And now we come to carbon dating. You know, one of the hallmarks of science is repeatability. And so it doesn't matter who does it, you should all get the same results. And that doesn't happen when they radiometric date rocks. And it says dating rocks and fossils with radiometric tests falls short of the necessary criteria to be considered scientific. And this scientist, he carbon dated a duck that was just killed, modern duck, and it tested to be 2,000 years old. Okay, and then there was this KBS tuff. This is a rock layer in Kenya that got dated a lot, and we'll explain why. But each time they dated it with the radiometric dating, they came up with a different result. At first, it was 230 million years old, and I'll explain why they keep testing it. But all these different results, which comes from 1.3 million to 230 million. So they're not getting the same results. But why were they testing that layer so much? Well, you can read about it in creation.com, and the article is called "The Pigs Took It All," because everybody agreed that it was 230 million years old, but then they found some mammal fossils underneath it. And so mammal fossils found beneath the KBS tuft had determined that the rocks should be between 2 and 5 million years old, based on their evolution theory. So then they had, that 230, that's wrong because we got these fossils. And then they found a skull 1470. And it's entirely possible that if skull 1470 had never been found, the KBS tuff would still be dated at 2.61 million years. And that's too old to have a human skull, so we got to change the date somehow. And they were going to do it they figured, well, we know when the pigs went extinct, and we know when the elephants went extinct, so which one should we use to date this layer? And the pigs won. In the 10-year controversy over the dating of one of the most important human fossils ever discovered, the pigs won. Pigs won over the elephants. The pigs won over potassium-argon dating. The pigs won over argon-argon dating. The pigs won over fission tracking dating. The pigs won over paleomagnetism. The pigs took it all. But in reality, it wasn't the pigs that won. It was evolution that won. In the dating game, evolution always wins. It doesn't matter if you got a scientific test that says it's millions of years old, but if you find that human skull, it's like, no, you're wrong, we're right. So by 2011, the Smithsonian had made Lucy into an ape. But remember our textbook, 2012? They were still teaching Lucy as walking upright. So my question is, all these frauds that have been pushed on us, what's the fraud today that's being pushed on us? And now let's go to Philip Tobias. And I'll just let Dr. Clark explain what happened here.
Dr. Ron Clark accused Dr. Tobias of committing fraud. He characterized it as a forgery, similar to the Piltdown Man fossil forgery.
The Piltdown forgery actually was very clever. The STW-53 forgery by Kernow and Tobias was stupid. Philip Tobias summoned me to his office and he said, I want you to make a new reconstruction of STW-53. And I said, oh, why? And he said, well, I'm not happy with the brain size, it's too small. And I said, but that's the way it is, it can't be made any bigger. The anatomy shows that was the size of the brain case. He wanted it to be a Homo habilis. In fact, he kept publishing this as a Homo habilis. He then asked a research fellow that he just appointed there, Darren Kernow, he asked him to make a new reconstruction. And what Kernow did was he separated out this near contact here. He separated it out by 8 millimeters and made this wider. He flexed the parietal occipital contact here. He flexed it upward to make it bigger. He took apart other pieces as well and expanded it, and he moved this frontal bone forward to make it very elongated. It's totally false, because there was no justification for what they did. It was simply Philip Tobias's ambition to make this into a Homo habilis.
Yeah, so it pretty much validates what Haeckel said 100-some years ago. Everybody's doing it. Apparently they're still doing it. And I wanted that video really bad. I wanted to show that video really bad. And so I got the digital copy, and I couldn't figure out how to get it so I could show it. And Dr. Werner's credit, he said, here you go. And so thank you, Dr. Werner and Debbie, for doing that. And these are the skulls. Notice how the skull on the left is what Clark put together, and that's how they're supposed to fit, according to Dr. Clark. But that wouldn't allow for an ape-man, and that's where all the money is. And so they stretched it out sideways. They stretched it out vertically, and from the nose to the back. And so now they got their ape-man. So are they still using that as an ape-man? Okay, so how does this happen? In this world of peer review, how does it happen? How do you get all these fraud pushed on in the museums and on the textbooks and on everything? How does this happen? Well, Dr. Werner says it's because they deny access to the fossils. Piltdown Man was held under lock and key for 40-some years. Same thing with the Neanderthal man. And even the ape man today, he couldn't get his hands on the fossils. He could get his hands on the fossils that have been debunked, but not the current ape man fossils. So the access is denied. There was a guy who took a transatlantic, I think it's from the Smithsonian, he did a transatlantic voyage in 1912 and 1920s to look at Neanderthal skull, and they won't let him look at it. Let him have a thorough one. And then his own television crew, they flew 16 hours to Africa to, they had permission to, see the fossils and interview them and stuff. And then they found out that that they were going to be interviewing Dr. Clark, and they said, nope, we aren't going to let you see him. And so 16 hours, and that's just, there's example after example like that. And unless full access is available, the fossil is not verifiable. Therefore, it's not scientific. So every one of those ape-man fossils, if we can't get our hands on them, they're not scientific. During the first 100 years of the theory of human evolution, the three most accepted and most promoted and most talked about ape-man fossils, the Java man, Neanderthal man, and also Piltdown man, were kept off limits to many or most scientists, and they were all frauds. And so they really wanted to push something so people can believe it. But what's the solution? And it was so fun yesterday. Mary and I, we were at the kiosk, and there was people talking, and there was we were talking, had a great conversation, and one was even the biology instructor. Just a great conversation. But anyhow, what do you do to fix this? And he agreed. What do? You make the fossils available. He says, refuse to publish any article about any fossil unless the author first places high-quality color photographs of the original fossils in the public domain. This is what we got, everybody, and these are the pictures. Take a look at them. Plus, make the fossils available for anybody who wants to look at them. Make sure that people can see that you're putting the models together properly. Because if that would have happened, the Piltdown man and the Neanderthal man, that would have been turned around. And then he also said, make the notes of the dig site in the public domain. The notes for the museum, the whatever other animals that they found in that site, put that on the public domain, because that would have stopped Nebraska man. People would have been able to see, hey, you found a pig's jaw that has human teeth in it. And then the fourth thing is, if anybody reneges on doing this, ban them from publishing from that journal forever. You know, that would take a small step forward for them to regain our trust. Because at this point in time, I look at it, the most prestigious museums, like the American Museum, they promoted a pig's tooth as a human, or the British Museum, they promoted a ape jaw and a human skull as a ape man. They, I think, have lost. Are they trustworthy? I would have to suggest, no, I don't think so. But you come to your own conclusions. I'm just giving you information, and you can see for yourself. Okay, so let's go back to where we started. If this be true, Haeckel says everybody's doing it, and we found a lot of examples of people doing it, if it be true. Yeah. And then why is this? Going back to that article, Haeckel's Frauds and Forgeries, it says, evolution has always had such an appeal. No answering to God and his rules anymore. None of those inconvenient thou shalt nots. And one can pretend he or she is standing with science while doing so. So this is a spiritual battle. It is not an intellectual battle. And we saw that with Nebraska Man. Okay, and I would like you to listen to Dr. Jerry Bergman. A lot of those books on the table are books that he's written about people losing their jobs or not getting grants or whatever because they have a creationist perspective. And that happened to Jerry Bergman several times. And you can listen to, this is a clip of a talk that he gave at the Twin Cities Creation Science Association. And just listen to this. He says there's frauds in science.
The problem of fraud in society, it's a serious, deeply rooted problem that affects no small number of contemporary scientific research studies, especially in the field of evolution. And I should add, especially in the field of medicine. Of all places where forgery should not be is in medicine. Why? I don't know if any of you have worked for medical school, but I have. And a lot of professors there, they don't get paid by the medical school. They get grants. And their salary comes from the grant. Well, if you don't get good results, your grant's not renewed. And so it's a matter of, can you feed your family? Or, hey, I will just tweak the results a little bit. So there's a strong incentive today for forgery in science. And so therefore there's an epidemic of forgery in science, and in medicine especially.
And so if you want to see more of that clip, there's the TCCSA YouTube channel. Go into that. The TCCSA, it stands for Twin Cities Creation Science Association. And there's some clips that you might enjoy. And one of them is the miracle of a baby at birth. You know, they're living in fluid and then they get born and they're living in air, and there's 5 things that have to change right now or they're not going to make it. And you would enjoy Dr. Cazell talk about that. And then you got from outspoken atheist to Christian professor. And then NASA was wrong, all that stuff. But then you can link to see his whole talk, which is just amazing. But let's listen to what your friend and mine, Yuval Harari, has to say about science. Now, at first I thought this might have been a deep fake, somebody putting this words in his mouth, but Mary found some more videos of them talking, and apparently this is what he said.
The real aim of science as a project, as an establishment, is not truth, it's power. Particular individuals, particular scientists may be very interested in the truth, personally. But as an institution, the real aim of science is power, and therefore...
Follow the science. Let me say that again.
We've got to follow the science.
We must and we will be guided by the science.
And so did those scientists have a lot of power the last few years? They shut down the whole world. There was a lot of power there. And now there's trying to get a lot of power with the climate alarmism. And I encourage people to read Inconvenient Facts so you get to see both sides of the story. And his position is, yeah, there's carbon dioxide. But for us freaking about it now, it's like worrying that your gas tank's going to overflow when it's an eighth full. Because we've had 8 times more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And he goes on to say, hey, if we had more CO2, we'd have more food and less droughts. And so again, I'd like to have people, and then just keep in mind, the predictions that the experts have been making for 50 years about the climate have all been wrong. You know, in the 70s, they were freaking out about the next ice age coming. And there's always 10 years away, and every prediction has been wrong. And I'm saying, hey, make an accurate prediction before we give you the microphone. All right, so... oh yeah, and also the experts. Remember the experts on weapons of mass destruction? You know, we have to go into Iraq because they got weapons of mass destruction, and how many millions of bombs later? Oh, there weren't any. So we have to be very, very, very careful about following the experts. So again, who trusts the experts? Would you bet your life that they're right, that they're accurate? So again, the people that brought us all this information are Dr. Werner and Debbie. Yeah, it's just a great couple. They did all this work to put together all this information. There's books available, there's DVDs available, and there's even a homeschool curriculum available. And they've got 4 semesters, 1 for each volume. And he says, your kids go through that, they're going to have a real hard time brainwashing them when they go to college. And so, again, you know, they did the work. I encourage people to share it. And again, that's our job. We need to be the megaphones. Say, hey, world, look at this 8-man. Look at the fraud there. Look at that museum. Why should we believe them? And if you order the PDFs on the book, I get the PDFs. You know, I'm not a big fan of PayPal, so I went into Amazon and got it on Kindle, and it's not as good. You know, get the PDFs. You go into, you click there. I clicked it and I didn't get it, so I thought it didn't work. So then I canceled my order. You know, because it says on the first page, but it takes 24 to 72 hours to get the PDF. So if nothing happens right when you click, that's normal. So again, yeah, and the PDFs are just wonderful. And again, he just released these March 4th of last month. So it's all cutting information. And again, have the experts. I mean, was Haeckel right? Is everybody doing this? Is everybody falsifying stuff to tell a story? Well, it seems like a lot of powerful people have done it. You know, are they trustworthy? You know, would you, again, bet your life that the experts are telling the truth? And the next question is, would you bet your eternal life that the experts are telling you the truth? You know, there's centuries of fraud here from the experts, and I encourage you to check out the one who's the truth. Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. That's the truth. And Jesus actually walked and talked and lived. That's why the calendar, BC stands for before Christ. I know they're trained to change it to BCE, before Common Era. But whatever you call it, it points to Jesus. And he did something so amazing that it changed the calendar for everybody. What did he do? He died on the cross to pay for our sins, and he rose again. And that's why we do what we do with the creation message, is to point people to Jesus and the Savior. And, you know, I didn't mention it on the slide with Debbie and Carl Werner. At the bottom it said, reaching one soul, priceless. And so that's what they want to do. We've got the high ground in so many areas. Dr. Carl Werner, he said that it's so exciting to be alive because we're seeing the Big Bang fall apart. We're seeing evolution fall apart. We're seeing the natural origin of life fall apart. And we're also finding the uniformitarianism perspective of the past fell apart. And so this is an exciting time to be alive, and it's our job to make sure everybody knows what the truth is.